She had taught 3 generations to read, to stand tall, to believe in justice. Yet here she was, trembling in a line that didn't even see her. Her name was Miss Gloria Thompson, 74 years old, Brooklyn born and raised. A woman who once walked school halls like a general now stands in silence, ignored like yesterday's receipt. The fees had crept in quietly, month by month, no warning, no apology, just money, gone, like her place in this world. Behind the counter, a young teller tapped keys with the cold efficiency of someone who never had to choose between rent and medicine. Behind the glass office door, a manager watched, arms folded, eyes dead. She wasn't just losing money. She was losing dignity. And just when the silence threatened to swallow her whole, the front door opened. And something shifted. Not the air, the balance of power. It didn't start with yelling. No one threw a punch. There were no flashing lights or camera crews. But make no mistake, violence happened here. Not the kind that leaves bruises. The kind that wears a person down inch by inch, policy by policy, until they forget they ever deserved more. Miss Gloria Thompson stood in line at City Gold Bank, Lower Manhattan, wrapped in a thick coat that had seen 20 winters. Her fingers clutched a creased envelope, but what she carried was heavier. Decades of memories, a lifetime of giving, and the sinking feeling that she'd become invisible to the very country she helped build. The line moved slowly. The room smelled like dry printer ink and old carpet cleaner. Flat screens blinked with interest rates that didn't apply to people like her. No one met her eyes. Gloria wasn't born yesterday. She'd taught high school in Brooklyn for 42 years, raised 2 sons through the war on drugs, lost one to a prison sentence longer than the crime deserved. She'd paid her taxes, cast her votes, and written letters to city councilmen. She didn't come here today to be difficult, just to ask why her savings account, one she'd held since Reagan was in office, was bleeding money. "They're just standard maintenance fees," the teller said, not looking up. Gloria leaned in. "They weren't there last month, or the month before." The teller sighed, finally glancing up. Young, pale, bored. Her name tag said Caitlin. "Ma'am, if you can't keep the minimum balance, those fees apply automatically. It's in your agreement." The word agreement felt like a slap. Agreement with whom? She didn't remember signing up to be punished for being poor, or for getting old. Behind the glass wall, branch manager Rick Levine noticed the holdup. His suit was expensive, but his eyes were cheap. He strolled over, not to help, but to make it stop. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, already assuming the answer. Gloria tried to explain. Rick cut her off. "If this bank no longer suits your financial needs, perhaps it's time to consider other institutions." Her face burned not just from the insult, but from the knowledge that no one in the room, no teller, no customer, was going to say a word. The silence was louder than a riot. This wasn't about a fee. It was worth considering whether a black woman who spent her life giving could expect even basic decency in return. The irony wasn't lost on her. In the 60s, they told her to sit at the back of the bus. In the 80s, they redlined her neighborhood. And now, in 2025, they were quietly draining her bank account and labeling it policy. She steadied herself. "All I'm asking is for someone to review it, not dismiss me." Rick chuckled. "There's nothing to review." And then the door opened. Not loud, not dramatic. But everything changed. A man in jeans and a black shirt walked in, the way people walk in westerns. Slow, grounded, with the weight of intention. He looked ordinary until he spoke. "Why are you talking to her like that?" The words dropped like thunder. Heads turned. Time paused. Rick blinked. The teller froze. Gloria didn't know yet who the man was. But in that moment, she knew something else. She wasn't invisible anymore. The moment he spoke, it was as if the oxygen shifted. Not just in the room, but in the very way people held themselves. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried weight, like the sound of a flag being folded at a veteran's funeral. Calm, deliberate, reverent. The words he chose cut through the cold air not like a knife, but like truth, sharp, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. Why are you talking to her like that? Miss Gloria turned slowly, unsure if she was dreaming. The man in the black shirt was familiar, but it wasn't his fame that mattered. It was his tone. There was no performance in his voice, just clarity, just decency. Rick Levine straightened his tie, his posture stiffening as if to remind everyone who was in charge. But control is an illusion, and in that moment, it slipped through his fingers like dust. "Sir," he said, feigning authority, "this is a private matter." The man didn't blink. He didn't take the bait. "Respect isn't private," he replied. "And neither is injustice." Every head turned. The bank, which had moments before felt like any other soulless financial institution, suddenly felt like a courtroom. No judge, no jury, just a room full of people who had, for far too long, been quiet witnesses to everyday cruelty. Miss Gloria's voice shook. "They've been charging me fees I never agreed to, fees I was never told about." The man nodded, gently taking the envelope from her hand as if it were sacred. He flipped through the pages with the focus of someone who had seen too many contracts written to confuse and exclude. Then he looked up, straight at Rick. "You've been doing this to her account for 2 months?" he asked, his voice low, steady. Rick opened his mouth, but no words came because there was no script for this moment, no policy manual to hide behind. "We apply charges according to balance thresholds and corporate protocol," Caitlin finally blurted out, her voice thinner now, less sure of itself. "And how many customers in this room?" the man asked, raising his voice just slightly. "Have been hit with those same charges, without warning, without reason?" There was silence. Then a hand went up, then another, then 3 more. It was a wave. Not a loud one, but powerful in its stillness. A quiet uprising from the very people who were used to being overlooked. The man nodded slowly, then turned back to Rick. "So this isn't just about one woman. This is a pattern." Rick's face flushed. "These are automated systems. We don't target anyone." "But patterns are never accidents," the man replied. "They're designed. Someone made a choice. Maybe not you, but someone. And you followed it." The weight of those words settled over the room like snowfall, soft, but impossible to ignore. The kind of silence that comes not from fear, but from realization, from knowing you've been complicit. Miss Gloria stood taller now, not because someone spoke for her, but because she had been seen. And in that visibility, she found her voice again. "I just want to be treated like I matter," she said. Not with anger. With grace. With the quiet strength of someone who had waited too long to be heard. And in that moment, the bank didn't feel like a bank anymore. It felt like something holy. Like a reckoning. The kind that starts with one voice and grows louder until no one can pretend they didn't hear it. Outside, the wind whipped down Wall Street, as if carrying a warning. Inside the bank, the air hung heavy with the weight of realization. The kind of realization that doesn't scream. It settles in your chest, makes your hands tremble, makes you remember things you tried to forget. Miss Gloria wasn't alone anymore, and not because someone famous had spoken up, but because truth had stepped out from behind the counters and cracked the polished facade wide open. A dozen customers stood still, eyes locked on the scene unfolding, hearts quietly pounding with recognition. They had seen this before. Not this exact moment, but this precise kind of erasure. It was in the schools that overlooked their children, the hospitals that delayed their care, the systems that said, "We value diversity," but punished anyone who dared to be anything other than silent. Today, it takes the form of overdraft fees and corporate policies. But underneath, it was the same beast. The young man near the front of the line, a delivery driver in a faded Mets cap, pulled out his phone and hit record. Not out of malice, not for views, but because his grandfather had told him, when the powerful start to sweat, you document it. Rick Levine was sweating. Vin Diesel, or rather, the man behind the screen persona, calm and composed, turned slowly to face the crowd.
He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. How many of you have been here more than 5 years? A few hands. And how many of you started getting strange new charges recently? More hands. Rick stepped back. His lips moved, but no sound followed. No speech could undo what people were now beginning to say out loud.
"I thought it was just me," said a woman near the ATM. "They charged me twice last month for something I never agreed to."
"I asked last week," said an older man with a cane. "They said it was a system glitch." The room shifted, not in volume but in direction. Energy, once flat and resigned, now moved like a current, crackling with urgency. The story had become larger than Miss Gloria. It had become theirs. Vin gestured to the screen behind the teller. "Pull up her account. Let everyone see what you've been hiding." Caitlin hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She looked at Rick for permission. He didn't give it, because he couldn't. Power had already left him. So she clicked. The screen lit up. The charges appeared in cold digital font. Predictable, monthly, unjustifiable. Gasps, murmurs. A middle-aged woman covered her mouth. A man cursed under his breath.
"You see it now?" Vin said softly. "This isn't about a glitch. It's a decision. One made quietly, in boardrooms far from here, and executed by people who stopped asking questions." Rick's phone buzzed. Then again. Then again. Notifications are pouring in like judgment. The young man with the phone held it higher. "Already live," he said. "The world's watching." And for the first time in a very long time, Miss Gloria smiled. Not because the problem had been fixed, but because the lie had been exposed. And once the lie is out in the open, it can't go back to hiding in fine print. Rick turned to leave, his shoes clicking across the polished floor like a man walking into his funeral. But the door didn't swing closed behind him. It stayed open, expansive, as if daring someone else to try what he did. Miss Gloria folded her hands gently, the same way she did when grading student essays late into the night, the same way she had done when her husband died, when her son was sentenced, when the world tried to shrink her down. Today, she didn't shrink. She stood. The screen glowed like a confession under a spotlight. Row after row of monthly deductions blinked back at them. Automatic fees, service charges, balance penalties. Cold, clean, and cruel. The kind of numbers that look normal until you see who they target. No one in the room moved. The truth sat there, undeniable, ugly in its precision. Vin didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He let the silence do what outrage never could, make people listen. Then, slowly, he turned toward Rick Levine. "So what now?" Vin asked. Rick's mouth opened, but nothing came. There were no excuses left. Just a man in a suit, drowning in the very policies he used to protect himself. His hands clenched slightly, the way men do when their power is slipping and they don't know how to catch it. Miss Gloria stood quietly beside him, no longer small, no longer asking. She was simply present. And somehow, that presence filled the room more than any threat ever could. "I was told those charges were normal," Caitlin mumbled, eyes down. "Normal," Vin echoed. Funny how normal always seems to hurt the same people. Someone in the back let out a breath. It wasn't just about Gloria anymore. It never was. It was about the grandfather in Queens who couldn't read the fine print, the single mother in Harlem who trusted her local bank, the Korean War veteran in the Bronx who had direct deposit but couldn't fight hidden charges. Vin turned to the crowd. If this happened to her, and to you, he paused, scanning their faces, then how many more are out there? How many others never noticed, or gave up trying? Rick stepped back, reaching for something. Control, narrative, authority. But it was gone. Caitlin looked at the monitor again, then at Gloria. I can reverse it. You'll do more than reverse it, Vin said calmly. You'll acknowledge it. You'll admit this was wrong. Not just to her, but to everyone. Rick's phone buzzed on the counter. Then again. And again. 3 vibrations. 4. 10. The young man with the Mets cap gave a slight nod. It's live. All over Twitter, Facebook, TikTok. Already hitting the local tags. Rick's face paled. He reached for his phone, but didn't pick it up. He knew what was waiting. 100,000 eyes. A city that had seen this story before, and this time it had a face. The bank's entrance opened again. A woman in business attire froze in the doorway, sensing the shift in the air. Behind her, a security guard peeked in. Even they could feel it. Power had changed rooms. Vin glanced back at Gloria. You okay? She nodded, slow but firm. Yes, I am now. He turned to Rick. Your move. And for the first time, Rick Levine didn't speak. He simply stepped back, shoulders tight, jaw clenched, as the foundation beneath him began to crack, not from force, but from exposure. What fell next wouldn't be loud. It would be administrative, corporate, quiet. But it had already begun. Rick Levine stared down at his phone, its screen a blur of vibrating panic. Notifications swarmed like bees, emails, messages, missed calls, press mentions, each one a reckoning. His fingers hovered above the glass, unsure whether to swipe, tap, or simply hurl the thing into the wall. But there was no escape now. The story was out, and it had teeth. At first, the reaction came in ripples. A manager's name is trending for all the wrong reasons. Comments are pouring in from former customers, ex-employees, people who had walked out of that same bank branch months or years before, carrying the same confusion and quiet shame as Miss Gloria. Then the media caught wind. By the time Rick made it back to his office and shut the door behind him, the sound of newsroom phones was already ringing in the background of Twitter videos. Local woman confronts banking injustice, one caption read. Actor Vin Diesel defends retired teacher in financial discrimination standoff, said another. A breaking news alert pinged. Corporate headquarters confirms internal review of Citigold Manhattan branch. Rick sank into his chair, the leather groaning beneath him like it, too, wanted to distance itself. On the wall behind him, the framed certificate of branch excellence from 2018 now felt absurd, like a lie frozen in glass. He picked up the receiver, dialed the corporate hotline. It didn't ring. They were already calling him. Rick Levine speaking, he said, trying to sound composed. The voice on the other end was clipped, polished, corporate. We've seen the footage, Rick. A task team has been dispatched. You are to remain on site. Do not speak to the press. You'll be placed on administrative leave pending investigation. He opened his mouth to protest, but the line went dead. Final. Like a door closing. Outside, Caitlin stood still. Her hands were folded in front of her now, not in defiance but in regret. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She knew what they had been part of. She had seen the truth in Gloria's face, and it had shaken her. Around the bank, a slow shift was taking place. Customers weren't just watching anymore. They were talking, swapping stories.
checking their statements. One woman walked up to Gloria, voice trembling. "They charged my dad like that too. He passed last month. We thought it was just his mistake." Gloria took her hand gently. "It wasn't." Meanwhile, a news van had parked outside. Reporters were gathering. A producer tried to enter the bank, but security stepped in, uncertain. The bank wasn't just a building anymore. It was a symbol now, of something that had been buried too long under silence and routine. Vin stepped aside, watching it unfold like a man who'd seen this storm before. He didn't pose. He didn't speak. His job was done. The truth had been sparked. Now the fire would carry itself. And deep in the corporate offices uptown, a boardroom full of executives stared at their screens, faces drained. No script, no spin, just raw footage, playing over and over, a loop of loss and revelation. It wasn't just a scandal. It was a pattern, and everyone watching knew it. What began with a woman and a question had turned into something else entirely. A reckoning with systems, a reckoning with silence. And it was just getting started. The official apology came 3 days later. It wasn't public at first. No cameras, no press release, just a letter on corporate letterhead delivered by courier to Miss Gloria Thompson's apartment in Brooklyn. The envelope was thick, the kind that usually carries bills or bad news. But this time the tone was different. The letter acknowledged the error, cited a review of internal protocols, and offered an immediate refund of all fees. It came with a new account upgrade, complimentary services, and a generic promise. "We are committed to better serving our long-standing clients." It was cold. It was corporate. But it wasn't enough. Because Miss Gloria hadn't asked for perks. She had asked for dignity. Later that week, a representative from Citigold Bank, someone higher up in a suit more expensive and a smile more polished, requested a meeting. In person. She agreed. He arrived at her building just after noon, briefcase in hand, guarded smile in place. But when he stepped inside and saw her sitting there, calm, composed, hands folded the way teachers fold them when they're waiting for a student to explain themselves, he blinked. Not because she was intimidating, but because she wasn't performing. She didn't need to. She had already won. "I want to personally apologize for what happened," he began. "It was unacceptable. We are restructuring our policies and the staff involved." She raised a hand, not harshly, just firmly. "Are you here to talk?" she asked, "or to listen?" The man paused, then nodded. "To listen." So she spoke, not with rage, not with demands, but with a grace that made his throat tighten. She told him about the years she had spent trusting institutions that were never built for people like her, about students who learned to fear banks before they learned how to use them, about the silence that makes you wonder if maybe you really do deserve less. And then she told him what she needed, not more promises, not a bonus account. She wanted a public acknowledgement. She wanted education reform around financial literacy in underserved communities. She wanted the bank to sponsor a program in her school district. Real investment, not reputation repair. The man said he'd take it back to the board. She said she expected a decision within 2 weeks. He stood to leave, then hesitated. "Thank you, Miss Thompson," he said quietly, "for your patience and your strength." She didn't smile, but she nodded. 2 weeks later, the bank issued a public apology, one that aired during prime-time news, acknowledging systemic oversight and patterns of neglect. They pledged funding for financial workshops in Black and Latino neighborhoods across the boroughs. They named the first scholarship after her, the Gloria Thompson Civic Trust. Gloria watched the segment from her living room. Alone. She didn't cry. She didn't celebrate. But she felt something loosen in her chest. A knot that had been there for years, maybe decades. The damage hadn't vanished, but for once, it hadn't been ignored. She picked up the remote, turned off the screen, and poured herself a cup of tea. Outside, The city pulsed on. But inside, for the first time in a long time, there was quiet. The right kind of quiet. The kind that follows justice. You don't always see the moment the world shifts. Often, it's quiet. A ripple instead of a roar. A voice that stands when others sit. A truth spoken plainly in a room where it was never welcome. Miss Gloria Thompson didn't set out to make headlines. She didn't raise her voice or throw stones. All she did was ask why. Why her account, after decades of loyalty, had turned against her. Why the bank she had trusted with her life savings now treated her like a liability. That question, simple as it was, tore a hole in something much bigger. What followed wasn't just a reversal of charges. It was a reckoning with the kind of injustice that hides behind terms and conditions, buried in small print and masked by algorithms.
The kind that speaks softly but steals loudly. The kind that says, "It's just policy," when what it really means is, "We hoped you wouldn't notice." But she noticed, and she spoke, and someone listened.
That matters. It matters because millions of Americans, especially the elderly, the poor, the forgotten, are told every day, in 1,000 silent ways, that their dignity is optional, that their questions are inconvenient, that their value is measured in net worth, not worthiness. And yet, stories like Gloria's remind us that dignity is not something you're given. It's something you hold, even when your voice shakes. Especially when it does. The bank will go on. The news cycle will shift. Vin Diesel will return to movie sets. But the moment will remain. In every corner of the country, there is someone who wonders if they have the right to ask for fairness. In every quiet office where policy has replaced people. In every heart that beats a little faster when the rules don't feel just. Because what happened in that bank wasn't just about money. It was about memory. It was about America's long habit of deciding who gets to belong and who has to prove they deserve to. Gloria didn't change the system that day. Not completely, but she cracked it. And through that crack, light came in, just enough for others to follow. So what's the lesson? It's this. Systems don't break by accident. They break because someone sees the fracture and decides not to look away. And healing doesn't start with policy. It starts with a name, a face, a moment of eye contact across a counter where no one expects resistance. We all have that moment waiting for us. Maybe it's at a bank. Maybe it's at a school board meeting, a hospital hallway, a voting booth, somewhere small that holds something sacred. And when it comes, we can do what Gloria did. Stand, ask the question, hold the silence, wait for the truth to answer back. And when it does, don't forget what it sounds like. Because that sound, soft as it may be, echoes far longer than a headline ever could. Some stories shout, others whisper, and then there are stories like this, quiet, steady, and so human they stay with you long after the credits roll. Miss Gloria didn't storm in demanding justice. She didn't rage. She simply stood her ground and asked the question no one wanted to answer. Why? That one word unraveled years of silence. But here's what you and I must remember. This wasn't just about her. It was about all of us, about what we accept, about who gets ignored when the lines are long and the systems are too tired to care. And maybe, just maybe, it's about what happens when one person decides they won't shrink anymore. So here's the truth. I hope you carry with you today. The world doesn't change when we shout louder. It changes when we refuse to look away. Have you ever been in Gloria's shoes? Or worse, stood by when someone else was? Tell us in the comments. Speak from the gut. Because of this space, we built it for stories like yours. Stories that shake something loose. Stories that stay. If this moves you, don't just scroll past. Subscribe to our channel. Share. Rewatch. Reflect. And most of all, remember. Thank you for watching. See you in the following video.